I'm going to now introduce Trevor Monroe. Trevor Monroe is going to be giving a primer on open resources for global health research. Trevor has been a great colleague and ally of SIGA's. He's worked with us on the Measuring Development Conference for many years and other work around proliferation and access to open resources for data-intensive research for development. Trevor's a program manager with the Analytics and Tools Unit at the World Bank, and that resides at the Development Economics Data Group. Yeah, we really welcome him. Trevor's really led on a lot of strategic initiatives to improve organizational capabilities and to put data into action through collaboration and partnership and technical and capacity support. And he's currently leading the Innovations in Big Data Analytics program, which works to accelerate the use of non-traditional data in World Bank research and operations. So thank you, Trevor, and I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Hopefully you can see my screen, and I'll try to share my video when you go ahead and let me do that. But look, I'm really excited to be here. This Measurement Dev conference has been one of my favorites, and I've just had the guilty pleasure of collaborating with my colleagues in DIME and with SIGA on this for several years. So, really, this talk is just going to be a general talk. I won't go too deep, but I do want to touch upon on how, the practice of open analytics and tools has really been changing and evolving the way that we work, the way that we collaborate to build data products, the way that we deliver them and work with others. So, what I'll start with is the World Bank was a key player in kind of the open data and open knowledge movement. So back in 2010, it used to be that data, development data and publications were under basically a subscription model, and the World Bank played a role along with other governments around the world to kind of disrupt that model and open up the data. And I would say our as part of that movement, it's always been there, but opening up the analytics and the code on how these data products are made started to take off in the era of like 2015 to 2019. One big milestone in that effort was the accreditation of GitHub. Not a trivial pursuit if you work in an organization, but we managed to get that done for reusable analytics. And also around this time period, working a lot more with like big data types of projects around the bank, trying to catalyze those, and that naturally hiring data scientists who work with these new open source tools. Also, incidentally, working with the same collaboration that brings you this conference, DIME and SIGA, working with the Berkeley Institute of Transparency and Social Sciences, which is housed in SIGA. And through that collaboration, we delivered a series of workshops that helped statisticians and economists, data science, and others start to use Git and GitHub to document and share and collaborate on their work. So I think that more than anything, kind of getting into that world and developing a little bit of skills to work has positioned us this maybe an acceleration that we see today, and what some of the colleagues on the last panel discussed, this transition into digital, which has been amplified and deepened and accelerated. So to motivate this, I want to kind of go back to a talk by Susan Athey, one of my heroes, who's worked at the intersection of economics and computer science, kind of these different communities. But she mentioned at this very conference in 2018, I believe, that, I'm paraphrasing, but engineering practices, data engineering, are transforming the way that research is conducted. Also along these lines, a friend and colleague of mine, Jed Sundwall at AWS, has a talk where he talks, this expression, free data is cheaper than ever. And I think what they're getting to is these these forces, like working with community of users, the cloud. There's just a dramatic increase in new services and tools, and it's lowering the cost of research. All this heavy lifting that used to, that still needs to be done, but is getting less so to work with these data sources and tools. So what you see is it's just it's allowing us in the way that we work to build data products in ways that are more open, they're reusable. In the process of doing this, we can be more collaborative and kind of iterate on the final products that we produce. So I just listed in these bullet points here, some of the pieces that have been, evolving over the last 3 years, but really are starting to mature and being used more widespread. So things like Python, pandas, open languages, libraries, and frameworks in the production of data products. The use of GitHub to manage code, to manage products, and not trivial, remotely, but also asynchronously, like using Git for timestamps and merging different workflows. Building on the work of others, open source communities, and particularly the use of licenses and open standards that allow this kind of interoperability and reuse. And then not just delivering the product, or the product could be a research product, it could be a dashboard, but also the code, algorithms, and underlying like tutorials to help sustain the use of these data products. That is really coming into maturity, at least in the work that I'm involved with at the World Bank. Inside the World Bank, and maybe sometimes outside, we share this kind of metaphor on how development data is produced and how it can be improved. So it's called like farm to table, and this describes this whole process of collection, of management, analysis, and making evidence-based decisions and impact from data. So this throughout, you see this yellow kind of line of capacity, and what I would say is that it's a good metaphor, especially also for open source. And maybe not, my colleagues may not describe it this way. So this is me independently just saying, open source really improves the soil, that we have, the training data that we use to build data products, the standards, the open licenses, and the working communities. We have better tools that we can use to build these products. We have methods and recipes that are used, open code and algorithms often stored in open collaborative repositories, and really we need to create better chefs, cooks, and I would just say consumers, data literacy and data capabilities across this value chain. So really this way of working helps to produce this public commons of assets, tools, and resources that really amplify the whole, the capabilities across this farm to table value chain, if you will, for development data. So just kind of keeping that in mind, I wanted to go into a couple examples. And what I want to motivate in these examples is how we're using these tools, how it's changing the way we work and the products or services that we produce by working in this way. So one is this collaboration, this project called the Mobility Task Force. And here in the bank, we're working with Dime, and Sveta presented on this project yesterday. And basically it's just a project that produces insights from mobile phone data, measurements, and visualizations. But what I want to focus on here is that, we have a repository in GitHub that collects these open algorithms. So these are ready-made measurements, right? The code that basically turns the mobile data call detail records into measurements and into visualizations. So we didn't start from scratch. We built on work from others, the open source community. And because it's open licensed, we were able to have this kind of ready-made repository of our work, which we use to kind of improve and enhance through projects that we implement. But this is the kind of the ready-made base that we start with. And we use this repository to collaborate, and we're working in several countries, but each country, we need to work with the mobile network operator, maybe with an academic or a firm, to get these these algorithms provisioned on technologies that process and analyze the mobile call detail records. Now, if you've worked anything in mobile with mobile network operators or with mobile data, especially CDR data, this is not pervasive yet, right? So it's very important that the technology that we use itself is abstracted from the underlying like operating systems and hardware, et cetera. So we do use open frameworks like Spark, Hadoop, and containerization technologies like Kubernetes and Docker. And this is really, I would say, almost essential to work in this space right now and in the future, given the fragmented nature of the mobile network operators in countries across the world. But it's happening, and what I really want to point out here is that at least in my career, it's really the first time where we're really using these collaborative code repositories to work with our vendors, to work with our clients in the country, to kind of take something and transform it into these insights in the systems. And without these technologies along the way to help us collaborate, to help us make this work, these algorithms interoperable, it wouldn't happen. And finally, we also do these workshops with national statistical offices in the countries so that they can, sustain these algorithms for insights. And to the extent possible, we also are using open notebooks like Jupyter Notebooks. The algorithms are open, and the content that we use, the workshop materials and the guidance books, all Creative Commons, all public goods. So from end to end, it's really a great example of working in a new way that would not be possible without these kind of open source practices, tools, and technologies. Yeah, a second one is a project that the World Bank has been conducting in collaboration with NOAA, the University of Michigan, New Light, and Amazon Web Services. And basically, we've published the entire archive every single night of Nighttime Light going back to about 1992 to present day. And here again, we're using similar, GitHub repositories, cloud repositories for the data. We are publishing the tutorials using, Jupyter books and interactive tutorials to help people kind of learn by doing and doing by learning, right? So we can take this and go into countries and help them build products that monitor SDGs, for example. In Nightlight, maybe just one component of that recipe to get that insight. So really just transforming the way we share our knowledge with these tools. Also, some standards. This is maybe the not so sexy stuff behind the scenes, but COG and STAC, so cloud optimized geotiffs and spatial temporal asset catalogs help to make this data that we're publishing more analysis ready. And we'll continue to improve on that. But you don't necessarily, you used to, probably need to have a degree practically in data science or computer science to work with some of these data sets, but that's changing, and it's getting easier with these tutorials and easier to discover and use for developers and analysts with these new protocols. Just a couple more, I won't go deep here, but also, something that's very important. When we watch Netflix or we go to Amazon, it knows enough about us to kind of make recommendations about what we want to watch or consume. We're not quite there with data, but our team, the analytics and tools team in DEC, are working on standards for documentation and tools like catalogs. And they're using technologies like natural language processing approaches and methods, machine learning, to kind of give the data a social life, right? So a lot of the information about data in the analytical scripts that are used are in text documents or reports, publications, for example. So kind of mining that data from those publications, those texts, and using that to enrich the data, the metadata, and to document the analytics really gives the capability to build these recommendation systems. So that's happening, and that's going to, I think, help build the basis for a lot of automation and kind of social science, making your machine learning is kind of your new research assistants, one of them. Also very, I think, important, the World Bank has long been using open licenses for data. We're now very soon publishing, it's done, but has not yet been used, a World Bank open source license for software tools. And our survey solutions team will most likely be using that license to open up, make us an open source software from Survey Solutions, which is the World Bank's survey product. So I'm just gonna have a few slides to wrap up here, but I think what I'd like to kind of make a call to funders and implementing agencies. So a lot of work in statistical capacity building, especially in developing countries, comes from donor-funded projects. And it would be great if we can prioritize, if the funders themselves can prioritize projects that strengthen this ecosystem, these open assets and things that can be reused, that go into making the products, so tools or libraries and training materials, etc. So really, to do that, I think you need program managers, you need people who are administering these funds to be aware, have really good optics on how these technologies are used or can be used, and how they can be built upon to strengthen that ecosystem in whatever sector or domain it might be, to improve development data and those products. And implementing agencies, so the World Bank is an example of one, but we're also, in some cases, we're donor as well. But when we do development data projects, thinking about how that project can improve, give back to the commons and these public goods, whether it be standards or otherwise, but in the implementation itself, strengthening those systems. And not just to deliver the product, but also with these open analytical tools and tutorials that help sustain them. And by doing so, it's not only, it's like a force amplifier. It improves the work and our capabilities. So the example that I gave with mobile data, very important for us to work with other partners in open source way to deliver value there. And we also enable others to do the same. The work that we contribute, others can take those tutorials or the products, etc., and create value with those. So just really, it's exciting time, I think, to be working in the space. And I do think that especially now, more than ever, this way of working is here to stay. And it's probably the only way of working. There are different models. Obviously, open source is, it's changing. I think there's been different waves, but there are different models. As you saw, Esri works in an open way. Other private sector, Microsoft, IBM, work in open source ways. So it's a very, I think, diverse. The diverse models that can be implemented, but at the World Bank, we do think it's very important to work in open ways and things that can be scaled and shared. So I've included some links to some projects and things that we're involved with, if you'd like to learn more, as well as links to specific tools for data science in working with mobile data, satellite data, text, etc. And with that, I just want to say thank you very much. And I think I will hand it back to Sam to bring us to a coffee break or press ahead.